Well, a very good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending where on the world you are tuning in from. My name is Adrian Reed, and a very warm welcome to this BA Community webinar. I'm really pleased today to say that we are joined by Alan Kelly, who's going to be talking about a topic that I'm sure is front of many of our minds. In fact, I know it is front of many people's minds because the last webinar we had was sort of almost a record for registrations, and this one is pretty much topped that one as well. So we're talking about the product owner role. So the title of the webinar is The Product Owner Role, Everything You Wanted to Know But Were Afraid to Ask. However, of course, because we have the safety of being in a webinar environment, you can actually ask it. So although Alan and I will be having a bit of a chat, there's the opportunity for you to add your questions to the Q&A. You can do so anonymously if you would like. Otherwise, if you don't ask your question anonymously, I will read your first name out when you ask your question. But before we begin, I should probably say just a few words about Alan. I've known Alan for, gosh, I don't know, a decade or more now. I think I first saw you speak at the BA Conference Europe, one of the first ones, and
Yes.
I've followed your work ever since. Alan's written many really good books. I mean, there are so many. One that I particularly enjoyed reading quite recently was Continuous Digital, but I know you've got a whole bunch of other ones out there as well. Agile coach, speaker, one of the chief protagonists and team members of Agile on the Beach, which is obviously curtailed this year, but I guess on for 2021, Alan, is it?
We are hoping it will run in 2021 indeed.
Fantastic. So excellent. Well, Alan, thank you so much for joining us. And yeah, so a sample of what Agile on the Beach looks like. Fantastic. So Alan, I guess we should kick off really by asking, what is the product owner role? Because the title is everything about the product owner role that you wanted to ask but were afraid. So what actually is it?
Yeah. At its most basic level, the role is when you walk into the Scrum Sprint planning meeting, who gets to say what is being done for the next 2 weeks? Fundamentally, at its core, that is the product owner role. And the questions I always ask behind that is, well, how do you know? How does that person know what needs to be done? I mean, the obvious things that comes from that is that person has to be familiar with the backlog. They likely prioritizing the backlog. They may well have put a lot of stuff into the backlog. Whatever the technique you're using for the backlog, whether it be user stories, use cases, or something else, they probably need to know about that. But fundamentally, how do they know what to put into the backlog, what should be in the backlog, what should not be in the backlog? And in the planning meeting, what should the priorities seek to be? So that fundamentally is the product owner role. I think clearly a lot of I'm assuming your audience is mainly BAs here. A lot of your audience are going to be seeing clear overlaps with the BA role there. And that's an interesting question perhaps to come into. And they should be talking about it. And sometimes the product owner is a bit like a product manager. We talk about that a bit more. What I don't like is where I see a product owner who's really a backlog administrator. They don't have the authority that comes from customer contact. They don't have the skills of the business analyst, and they're seen by the organization and perhaps by the team as somebody who just goes, this week I'll have that story, and that story. And they don't, if they have a skill, it's in looking at this backlog and trying to cram as much into the sprint as possible. The product owner should be much more than that.
Yeah,
and we should talk about that.
So it sounds, Alan, if I'm understanding this correctly, that from your perspective, actually the product owner has to have simultaneously an understanding of the detail of the detailed features, functions, stories, whatever, but also has to be able to align them to the strategic context that the organization is operating in. So they've got to actually think about like what's being delivered, but also the bigger why at the organization level. Would you say that's true?
Yes, but I will caveat it. the bigger picture, the objectives, and I think sometimes we get bogged down in the nitty gritty of the backlog and the stories, and how many stories we produce, and we lose sight of that. What is the thing we're trying to produce overall? Not how many stories can we cram in this week, but what's the thing we're trying to create? So absolutely they need to have a strategic role. And frequently they need a grasp of the detail. They need to know the detail. However, they can get away with knowing less about the detail if the rest of the team are in a position to provide that detail. So if, for example, you're working with a bunch of developers who've been working in this field for 10 or 20 years, I've met such people. A company I knew do very precise GPS systems. You know, they're positioning oil rigs. They have to be pretty precise.
Yeah.
And actually, a lot of their software engineers are experts in that kind of stuff themselves. They understand the GPS signals. They understand maps and all of that. And the product owner doesn't necessarily need that massive detail because the team have it. And similarly, if the team and the product owner are in a position where they can just go and ask an expert, or they can ask the customer, then perhaps you don't need that detail. But when you get a situation, and I've seen this as well, where the developers don't know very much. So one airline I know, they outsourced all their development, kept it onshore, but they outsourced it to a company who didn't have a lot of people with experience of travel systems. And the development team needed lots and lots of detail from the product owners, and there was BA as well. So sometimes the teams do look to the product owner for detail.
Yeah.
Other times you can source the detail elsewhere.
That's interesting, because it implies, it's an interesting point, Alan, because it implies that there's almost a spectrum of detail that has to be understood, from very, very high level and strategic right down to the sort of, you know, the finite detail. And almost being provocative, as long as somebody has access to everything on that spectrum, it probably doesn't matter too much who, as long as the responsibilities are understood. Is that a fair statement?
I'd agree, and I'd go even further than that and say, as long as somebody has the authority, they don't necessarily need to have that detail themselves if there's people they can trust. But somebody needs to be able to make a call, and they need to do that. They need to understand that spectrum, particularly the objective stuff. I always say there's 4 things a product owner needs. At a very basic level, they just need the skills to do the job. They need the skills to write stories, pick priorities, all the stuff you read in the Scrum books. They probably also need the skills they need some business analysis skills, they need some product management skills. The exact mix is going to depend on your domain, and they may need some other skills, but just entry level, every product owner needs some skills. Secondly, they need authority, and they need authority from the organization and from the team, that they are the person that when you walk into that planning meeting every 2 weeks, that they can say this, this, and this, and importantly, not that and the other thing. The ability to say no. If the product owner doesn't have that authority, or if the day after the planning meeting, somebody else is wandering along and saying, what, were you doing that? You don't want to be doing that. Hey, listen to me, I'm more important than he is. Then they don't have that authority. The third thing they need is they need legitimacy. And authority is different from legitimacy. I know they're very closely entwined, but they need to be respected as the person who makes that call. If the organization is saying, you know, there's people in the organization saying somebody else should be filling that role, and they're undermining them, or even on the team, if you've got a bunch of developers and testers saying that product owner doesn't know nout, that the product owner, I'm the developer, I've been on this team for 5 years, then if they don't have the legitimacy, then they're going to find their job very difficult.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? So you've got the sort of the skills, the authority, and the legitimacy, and that's interesting because I've certainly seen situations, Alan, as I'm sure you have, where the product owner is overruled by someone more senior than them, and that's
God,
like,
yes.
well, that's not, you're not, you know, that causes an issue, and that's authority. But I'd never explicitly thought about legitimacy, but you know, I've also, like, the examples you give really resonates, because it's like, well, actually, I've seen situations where it's like there's a product owner, but everyone, I mean, ignores them's too strong a word, but like things happen.
Yeah.
Spite of rather than with them, if you know what I mean, which is quite a painful place to be as well.
Yeah. You can have authority on paper,
Yeah.
but if you don't have legitimacy, then do you remember that scene of Blackadder, the old comedy for the young people in the comment that remember this? There's a scene where Blackadder is appointed head executioner, and he lines up his staff. There's about 3 of them, and he tells them what they're going to do that week, and he finishes. And then Percy, his sidekick, stands up, and Percy starts to make a speech, and the staff have started talking to each other, and they start wandering off and doing stuff. And that's a classic example, you know, in that situation. On paper, Percy had authority because he was Blackadder's right-hand man. But he didn't have legitimacy. Nobody paid any attention to him. He was completely ignored. He can say what he likes, and we don't care.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So we have our first question from Hertja. And Hertja says, hi, I agree with most of what you're saying, and I might misinterpret you, but your description of the product owner in a planning session sounds a bit like a project manager. In my view, the product owner explains to the team the priorities and the need for the items on the backlog to be done, and then the team decides which items will be included in the sprint goal. What do you think of that perspective?
It's a collaboration. And I think if you view it as a collaboration, the product owner knows what's important to the business. And partly the product owner's role is to explain to the team why this is important. Now, yes, you want to listen to the team, and you want to hear what the team are suggesting, because the team are going to have approaches to this. This is where the problem and the solution conversations start to happen, because the two feed off each other.
Yes.
So a simple level, the product owner is coming in and saying, look, the problems we want to address this sprint are. And the team are coming back and saying, okay, well, we can address that. We know a solution to that. Well, we might go about this. And it's a negotiation. And I think that is different from the old project manager role, where the project manager came in and it was much more of a, you do this and you do that and you do the other.
Yeah, and it's sort of interesting, isn't it? Because there's a bit of a sort of like I think in pictures, Alan. This will probably make no sense, but it's like the yin and the yang, right? In that actually you need the element of both, because the team are going to help understand what's possible, and actually there will sometimes be well, actually you can't have those things in that order because there's a technical reason, which means it's impossible. So there's that sort of give and take, and that sort of collaborative type approach that you mentioned. So Eric asks, where should the details come from in case of an inexperienced team, if not from the product owner?
Well, the default answer is the product owner. You may have, in addition to the product owner, a subject matter expert, or there may be another subject matter expert who the team can talk to. There may be, in addition to the product owner, a business analyst, and often the product owner is a business analyst by training. And in many ways, business analysts are really trained proxies, and so they fall quite naturally into the PO role. But sometimes they're actually supporting a PO. The other thing is, can the team go and ask for the details? Can the team go and meet customers, meet the subject matter experts? Can the team do their analysis? And this kind of comes on to Vlad's question, which came out next. We didn't get to the fourth thing on my list of what every product owner needs.
Yes, yeah.
I was wondering if anybody would notice that. The fourth thing is time. And it's the most difficult one to get. And it's time I talk about doing their homework. Again, when you read the Scrum books and you read about writing user stories and backlogs and prioritization and all the rest, excuse me, and I then say, but they need to know what's important. They need to do their research. And I think of that as their homework. When they're not in the scrum, they're going off talking to stakeholders, analyzing markets. And so going back to the question we started with, who has the details, quite often product owners get shorter time, they get overloaded.
Yeah.
And if they can enroll the team to help them with that work, and if they're an inexperienced team, then okay, the team don't have the experience to do it, but if the team can learn and the team can start to get that experience, then that's the old teach a man to fish thing. If you've got an inexperienced team and you give them the answers, you're giving them fish, which is great. And it may be a solution that works for you. The other answer is to teach them to fish, teach them to go and find the answers themselves.
Definitely. So that's, I mean, in terms of the sort of doing the homework there, Alan, that sort of picks up on Michelle's question. So Michelle asks or says, in my opinion, the product owner's most important work is the work spent in the business, understanding what the customer wants and ensuring buy-in to changes rather than specifically or solely in the Scrum team itself. What's your opinion of this? And I think your answers probably just addressed that, Alan. I think Michelle are on the same page with that.
Yeah, I think if you think about the team, they're all, unlike a project manager again, the product owner doesn't really, they're first amongst equals. They may have authority on paper to say what's being done, but they don't have authority to go and boss the team around. Their authority and their legitimacy often stems from the fact that they are the connection to the customer, the connection to the business. If you have a product owner who's speaking to customers, speaking to the wider business, then that feeds into their legitimacy. So Michelle's absolutely right. Other people on the team might be able to supply the detail, but you can't, okay, this is going to sound really nasty. I don't want everybody in the team claiming to represent the business, because you'll just end up with a bun fight. We centralize that in the product owner. So while everyone else may understand it and hopefully knows about it, when somebody has to make a decision, it isn't a democracy. It may not even be a debate, but if a decision needs to be made, it's on the product owner's shoulders.
And they're accountable, of course, for the outcome. So Hertja's sort of in agreement and saying around the collaboration, which is, so I think we're on the same page there. Just moving to a slightly different topic, Alan, around product versus project. And this is, I mean, this is interesting, and this also feeds into digital and all sorts of other things. But there's an argument that says that actually product management is a different approach to project management. And there's an argument that says that what some organizations do is they try and put a sort of product management framework and wrap project management around it. And there are different opinions over whether that's a good or sensible thing. And I just wondered what your view was.
Yes. Certainly in some organizations, some individuals make the mistake of interpreting the word product as a different spelling of the word project. And they are, I suppose you can see them as different ways to approaching the work to be done. I think philosophically they're very different. They may have a lot of similarities on the surface, but philosophically they're different. And they're different because if you think about the way project managers are traditionally trained and certified, we go back to their famous iron triangle constraints, and we've got time and maybe cost. So I like to put resources, because in the technology domain, cost is resources multiplied by time. And then you've got features down one side. And project managers are largely trained to regard the features, the thing you have to deliver, as given. They are handed it on tablets of stone. And project managers are trained in the scheduling, the time, in the cost management, perhaps in quality, perhaps in other resources, perhaps in risk management, and a bunch of other stuff. But project management fundamentally regards the feature set, the thing to be delivered, as a fixed entity. I always think that this is actually the single, if you want to boil traditional and agile down to one difference, it's this. On a traditional project, as I'm sure you remember, Adrian, before any work was done, the BAs were sent in and they wrote a great big volume.
Yes.
And it was signed in blood.
Yes.
So before day one, there was lots of negotiation over what should we build. And then it was signed in blood and it's handed over to the project managers. And their success criteria is delivering all of this in some given time frame for some given cost.
Mm-hmm.
And so project managers do not want to negotiate on features. And every time there's a delay, and there's always a delay, the schedule gets changed. They steal some time off testing, which bites them later on. They get some more money. They get some. And project managers do everything except vary the feature set.
Mm-hmm.
Until, and this is the difference with Agile, until very near the end, when they can no longer get more money, more time, more people, they give in and negotiate on features. And in Agile, you negotiate every 2 weeks. Now, product management and business analysts is the same. They are trained in the what. They are trained to always be thinking about what are we building? What should we be building? What's the biggest bang for the buck? What's going to have the biggest impact? What's the value? And Agile puts all the emphasis onto the what. We take the resources and the time is fixed.
Yeah.
Negotiate on features. And that's why business analysis and product management are more applicable than traditional project management.
And just to, so I think what you've just said there probably partly or possibly fully addresses Maria's question as well, which is, can you give some insight into the expectations of the role of product owner and project manager? It's quite confusing to me sometimes. So, I mean, I think you've probably at least partially addressed that, Alan, but any other thoughts on differences between the product owner and project manager? And I think, you described a traditional project manager role there. Of course, the role is evolving as they all are. But any other differences you'd see between the two roles?
Well, I'm laughing a little bit because I think there's a situation in some organizations where they've assimilated that in Agile, and particularly in the Scrum world, there are no managers. And they rip out all the managers. And then somebody, one of the senior executives, a director, somebody from another team wanders in and there's no managers anywhere and they don't know who to speak to. And they look around and they either see the Scrum Master, although some organizations don't have them, or they see the product owner and they think, oh, they must be the manager. And I've seen this institutionalized. And one organization I'm thinking of, all the project managers were removed, but a lot of the project management work remained.
Mm-hmm.
And the only person who was in position to do it was the product owner. So to Maria's point, it's very difficult often to see the difference because the two roles get mixed up. I think it is pretty, as we were saying, fundamentally, the product owner is thinking about what, not when.
Yeah.
And there are some other responsibilities like interactions with other teams, the classic dependencies, costing, and they may fall under a product owner. They may fall outside the team. They may be picked up by a Scrum Master or some other team members, but often the product owner ends up being the dog's body.
Yeah. So, which is always a challenge. And actually, just on that thought, Alan, what would you say the difference between a product owner and a product manager is? Because I'm seeing more and more product manager roles in the sort of clients I work with, as well as product owners.
Yeah. So, again, to my mind, the world is a bit mixed up. In that there is a school of thought which sees the product owner as a type of junior product manager, which is completely rubbish if you think about it, because by definition, owners own the place. Managers are hired guns. The only place where managers are more important than owners is in banking. And you can tell that because of the way banks' profits gone in the last few years. They all go into bonuses. The managers are very good at creaming it off. In the rest of the world, managers are hired guns. They come and go. Owners, particularly if you've got a family business, think about the family business. You know, the owners are there generation after generation. The managers come and go. And that's kind of the metaphor of product owners. But for some reason, the industry started to interpret product owner as a lesser product manager.
Yeah, yeah.
Now, I have a view of product ownership that is quite expansive for some people. And I think rather than saying the product owner is a type of product manager, I think the product manager is a type of product owner. That if you view the product owner as a large role, there's one type of person who fills that role who has business analysis skills, and they largely work inside corporations, and they're about improving processes and all that good stuff. And there's another type of product owner who largely has product management skills, and they are skilled in looking at the market, talking to external customers, doing projections on sales and that kind of stuff. So if you see the product owner is a very broad role, the product manager is a specialist type of product owner.
Interesting. I like you, Alan. I'm seeing no consistency on the way those terms are used, which is, again, it means I find myself a lot when working with clients saying, when you say X, what can you mean by X type of thing? So
you have to look behind the label on all of these roles.
Yeah,
and I think part of the problem here in the UK, and I'll let people elsewhere work out where their country is on this, is that before about the year 2003, we didn't have the title product manager in the UK. I went out to Silicon Valley in the year 2000. I got my timing spectacularly wrong. I got .com bust instead of .com boom. Before I went to Silicon Valley, I'd never met a product manager. I've met plenty of BAs, but I'd never met a product manager. These were a foreign type of person. Like every other person I met in Silicon Valley was a product manager. And I realized product managers are a close cousin of a BA. BAs tend to focus inside the organization, and product managers tend to focus outside the organization. And today, with the digital world, so many of our products, which were traditionally internal and were strictly speaking BA type work, now have an external component, and customers can see them. So this clear differentiation exists between BA and product manager is all a bit fuzzy now. And then product owner comes along and muddies the waters some more. But actually, you see product owner as a superset.
Yeah, and it's interesting. And I mean, I thought just to throw in there, and then we'll take some more questions from the audience. But I know, well, I mean, I've been following the sort of no projects hashtag for it seems like a long time. But I know you sort of shifted that in your continuous digital book, and that for me was quite an interesting shift. If we take the view that digital's never done. Like, you know, your digital portal isn't a project because it's not like you deliver it and it's done, it's forever adapting.
Yep.
Well, what you were just saying about product owner and product manager would make more sense in that environment, because there's someone owning and managing whatever. And in fact, it's not not even the portal, it's the service.
Yes.
It's the end-to-end service that they're owning.
Yes.
So with that in mind, well, I guess digitally or not, Kavita asks, how should the BA and PO work together to make a success of the delivery? And also, what are the key differences between the two roles? I mean, this is the question that will be on everyone's lips.
I thought it might be. So you're assuming there that you have a BA and you have a product owner, and they are distinct individuals. And I always remember I assume it's still the definition of the IIBA definition of business analyst, and it is somebody who does business analysis.
Yes, that's right. Correct.
Yeah. So a product owner is going to be doing business analysis. If they're not, they're missing a trick here. Therefore, by definition, the product owner is a business analyst. So, and it's not uncommon, particularly in corporate environments, that you see somebody who is trained as a BA, has worked as a BA, maybe even still has the BA title, takes on the product owner role. And I think that is quite natural. I think it's perhaps more authority than many BAs traditionally have, but I don't see that as a bad thing. I hope BAs don't. So quite often, doing business analysis, being a BA, is just part of being a PO.
Mm.
On other occasions, you have a PO who maybe they're a subject matter expert, maybe they're somebody who has serious authority, maybe they're someone who's just short of time. Maybe they lack the time or they lack the skills, and the BA that is often there to work with the product owner as their support, their right-hand man. And particularly, so I've seen product owners who are kind of plucked from the field. They're pulled, in one case, literally off the oil rig and come be a product owner for this team. They don't know how to work with the dev team.
Yeah.
A BA on that team would be there to support the product owner, to help them work and help them craft their stories and explain acceptance criteria. Other times, the BA is more of a team member. The BA is more helping the team understand the detail.
Yeah.
So I don't think that there's an easy answer to Kavita's question. It depends on the situation. Who's got the skills?
It depends on the context. And one thing that was striking me as you were speaking there, Alan, is one pattern I think that is, although it's a slightly different question, but one pattern that I think, in my experience at least, is best avoided is when the BA sort of gets told they're a PO, but then they're in that situation where they might have the skills, but they probably haven't got the authority.
Yeah.
You know, that's quite a painful place to be. And I think one thing, if anyone is making that transition, if it is a transition or if they're taking on that responsibility, the thing that probably we're least used to doing, at least in my experience as a BA practitioner, is we're very used to advising, but we're not very used to deciding. And that is, for me, that's quite a different thing. And that's not to say that BAs can't, because of course we all make decisions every time we get out of bed, type of thing. But it's a sort of a slightly a juxtaposition. So
I think if you find yourself in that situation, what you might want to do is try and decide who do you see as the real decision holders. And perhaps before you go into that sprint planning meeting, you've already worked out in your own head what you think they should do. Perhaps you take that draft and you go and sound out those stakeholders, those people with real authority.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that builds legitimacy, which has that, you know, starts to get the authority. So, okay, so then that sort of leads us nicely to Emma's question. So Emma asks, is it advisable to have one person that is the PO, BA, and subject matter expert? Is this too much for one person to manage? I mean, that is a lot, isn't it, Alan? I mean, I guess it depends on the size of the...
Well, I was going to say, it's a scaling question. So one of the ideas I like to I like to evangelize, if you like, is this idea of a minimally viable team. And we use a minimally viable team because in the old days, you say, how long is this going to take? How much is this going to cost? Oh, we have to go and write a business case beforehand. And in Agile, particularly in dual track, we haven't got a clue what's going on here. So I say you start with a minimally viable team. And the minimum is probably 2 or 3 people, one of whom has technical skills and from day one can think about solutions and hopefully even craft a real minimal viable product. And somebody else has got more business skills and subject matter skills, and the 2 of them work closely together and they create something, and they research the market and they create some solution and they sound it all out. In a really small situation like that, I hope it's all on one person. Now, conversely, if you've got a team of, 15 people and some testers and some developers and all, yes, it is. And you know, the 4th thing on my list of 4 things was time, because there's just so much that a product owner should be doing. and product owners deserve a home life.
Yes, yes.
So at some point, you do need to start spinning it out. But every time you spin it out, you create handovers, and you create the potential to lose knowledge and make mistakes. Things will fall between the cracks. So on a really small team, I'd want it all in one person's head. As you scale up, you do need to pull in other people, whether it's a BA or subject matter expert, depends on the situation. But be aware that as you scale up and you add specialists, you are also bringing in costs, and you've got these two forces pushing against each other.
That's it, and you create more communication paths. You know, there's sort of those brilliant diagrams with a number of communication paths, number of people you increase. So just a couple of related questions. If I'll bring in Maria's question first, which Maria says, I feel the product owner needs to work closely with the technical architect or technical architects to be effective, since something technically might not be feasible. Would you agree? And I'll just combine that with Milena's question, which is, what are your practical tips to product owners to win the trust of technical people? So those are interesting, perhaps two sides of a similar coin.
Yeah. Well, Milena, excuse me, it's late in the afternoon. Milena's question is easier. Practical tips: show them respect, and particularly they will, because every developer moans about this, technical debt and things they want to refactor, and find some way of showing them you respect that. One way, although it's always a difficult call, is to say, at some strategic level, what percentage of our capacity are we willing to put into reworking, re-engineering what we've got? And then suppose you decide it's 20%, you might allow the team to suggest 20% of the work to be improvement work, or perhaps one sprint in 5 you just give over to them. Show them you respect them. Empathize with their pain. When they say this code's difficult, can he take a captain? Empathize with them, try and cut them some slack, give them some space. And if you can trust them, then I hope they will come to trust you. Maria's technical architect is a more difficult question, because again, I feel as I'm using the same answer here as I've used before. So apologies if I repeat myself. What do you mean you have a technical architect?
It could be application architect, it could be an infrastructure architect, it could be a security architect,
network architect, and God knows how many other types of architect. I'm one of those people who I hear the title architect and I start to get very nervous. Some people probably come across the concept of a space cadet architect. I think it was Joel Spolsky originally invented this, and a space cadet architect is so off in the clouds with his UML diagrams or her UML diagrams and greater concepts that they've lost track of the code. Now, for me, I understand there are some types of architect, network architect, who don't code. But I think all architects need to have some level of coding still. Because if they don't, then the gap between what happens here and what they're thinking here. Years ago, I worked on a project for British Railways. As it went from being British Railways to Railtrack, there's 120 people on the team when I joined it. There's about 8 of us coders, and there were 4 more technical architects. Unfortunately, the consultancy had pulled in technical architects who used to work on their mainframe systems in COBOL and hierarchical databases, and we were writing on a relational database in C++ on a Windows system.
Right.
And what the architecture document said and what the code did were very different things. I mean, that's an extreme example. You want architects who are still involved with what's happening. And the architect's role changes in Agile. The architect's role is much more of an educator role. They are there to help the developers, the more junior developers, improve their skills and to guide them in the direction of what's best for the system in the long term. And the idea that there is a technical architect who answers questions on behalf of the developers and who creates solutions for the developers to implement is not really, it's difficult to fit in with an agile team. Now, I know lots of organizations still have a technical architect. In agile, we try and eliminate them because there's handoffs. So I hope Maria's architect is the type who's just a senior developer, a senior coder, someone with more oversight, bigger picture stuff. And yes, the product owner needs to be working with them. But the technical architect, like the product owner, is is first amongst equals. They may be they're more experienced, but again, it's collaboration. It's not the product owner and the technical architect deciding what is good for everybody else.
Yeah, so that's a theme that I think cuts through all of this, Alan, isn't it? It's around collaboration and sort of co-creating the solution. So, so Sharon just is thanking Vlad. So she says, "Thank heavens for Vlad picking up on missing number 4. I was waiting. I can't believe." And thank you, Vlad and Sharon. I can't believe I missed that, which is a rookie mistake. So, and apologies. This isn't a name I'm familiar with, so if I pronounce it incorrectly, I apologise. I think it's Adeobi. Who asks, I've seen job ads where the product owner will work with or report to a product manager. Does that setup mean the PO can be overruled in the sort of backlog prioritization and grooming sessions?
Let's say one thing straight. Let's drop the word grooming.
Yeah.
I know it's in the old Scrum books, but in England, the word grooming is taking on negative tones.
Yes.
So I believe Scrum's dropped it out. Refinement sessions.
I think that's a better term, isn't it, Alan?
But anyway, so I'm sorry, Adobaya. Sorry about your name. Yes, absolutely. It's one of the problems you see, that the PO can be over when you've got this product PO reporting or junior to a product manager, then it undermines the PO's authority. The PO has, to my mind, it's a misunderstanding of both roles, but it is common, I say, particularly in banking, and it does mean the product owner is working at best with borrowed authority. Again, I think if you're in that situation, you want to make sure that you understand the product manager. You perhaps preview some decisions, some prioritizations you're coming up with them. You talk to them. The problem is always that you may agree things with the product manager, but when you walk into that sprint planning meeting and the techie say, but do you realize if we do that, it's got these knock-on effects?
Yes.
The product owner doesn't have the authority in that meeting to say, we'll do that instead, or do it a different way. If they're always having to affect some other authority, and if that authority isn't in the room, you've got a delay.
Absolutely, or even worse, an assumed decision that then later gets overruled, and you've got sort of rework type of thing.
Yes.
So just bringing in Hertje's question here. So Hertje says, I completely agree with your view on product owners versus product managers, but I'm curious how you see the product owner versus product manager role in some form of scaled framework, like, for example, SAFe, so the Scale Agile framework. Or I guess it could equally be in disciplined agile, in any of the scale frameworks.
Yes. So I think it is a question of scaling, and it goes back to Maria's earlier question about the time and the fact that you run out of time. And I think there does come a point where the product owner needs to be split into multiple roles. And one way might be by involving subject matter experts or BAs to take some of the detail load off the product owner. Another way, in product companies, you frequently find that the product manager type product owner also has marketing responsibilities. And so one of the easy splits is get a dedicated marketing person in there, a marketing manager.
Yeah.
The other thing is, and particularly again as you scale and you've got multiple teams, and remember, really you want each team to be an autonomous unit. The moment teams start depending on each other, you get all sorts of problems. We rather than thinking about managing dependencies, you'd be thinking about eliminating dependencies. But where you've got multiple teams, they do need to coordinate. And what I like to talk about here is we split the product owner, and I'm going to use the titles tactical and strategic. Whether you label them BA, product owner, product manager, senior, junior, or what, I don't care. I like to think that you've got a tactical product owner and a strategic product owner, and one is not superior to other. They've just got different specializations. The strategic, as you might think, is thinking about, bigger picture stuff. It's strategic. They are thinking, longer term. They're thinking years into the future. They are talking to more stakeholders. They're talking to more external customers. They probably live a large part of their life on the road. They are out there. And then you've got your tactical product owners. And while the strategic spends most of their time with external customers and stakeholders, the tactical spends most of their time with the team.
Yeah.
The tactical spends most of the time in the room. The tactical is working more with the stories and the tasks. The strategic is working at the epic and maybe the story level. And we split them out that way. But the two of them have to speak with one voice. Ideally, they can deputize. If one is on holiday, the other one can step in. And then you start to see the strategic. You can then have multiple tactical product owners. So the example I usually come back to, but I've no idea how accurate it is imagine Microsoft Office. You've got a strategic product owner for Office, and you've got a tactical product owner for Word, for Excel, for PowerPoint, and whatever other things. Now, they all need to work together, and they need to be working towards the same overall goals. And the strategic product owner's got more of a role in setting that overall goal and the longer term picture. But the Word product owner has autonomy to work with their team in the near time to satisfy and similarly the PowerPoint and the Excel.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting because I know there are various models out there that talk about different planning horizons in sort of agile environments.
Yeah.
And there are various flavors of it, but often there are sort of like three, where there's the sort of strategic long-term view, there's the sort of product view, and then there's the the sprint or iteration view. And I always find that really quite useful. And I think one of the questions I always ask when I'm working with an organization is, if I can't see a connection between this view and that view, then I start to get worried, because it's like, okay, but why does any of this matter? Like, if we can't answer that question, then we're just sort of in chaos. So so just bringing in Tim's question here. Tim asks, do you have any tips for working with a PO as a BA and doing discovery within the business, given the constraints of working from home, especially given the amounts of collaboration that continuous improvement and development needs? I mean, that's a tricky question, Alan. Any thoughts on that one? I might have a few, but I'm sure you have some too.
I can easily imagine how developers, in fact, I know developers that work from home, but the PO, the product manager, the business analysis manager, it's so much about understanding people. And anyone who's worked in any of those roles and has talked to customers knows that very often what they say and what they do are two different things.
Yes.
And I think I struggle. My general rule with anything when it goes distributed and remote is you suddenly lose all the informal communications. You don't bump into people getting a coffee and have a conversation. You suddenly have very formal, we have to schedule a Zoom meeting. And I think you need to work harder at those conversations. You need to try and formally create some space to have informal conversations. You just need to keep at it. I don't really have any specific tips. Adrian, you helped him out.
Well, I don't think I have I don't think there is a solution. I think Tim's question is a really good one and a really tricky one. I mean, I'd echo what you say, Alan. I'd add that I'm finding a lot of the online whiteboard tools. So I mentioned earlier, I think in pictures. So in the real world, I'm the sort of person that will say, "Can we just draw this? Can we just can we just draw this problem?" And what you can't see down here is I've actually got a graphics tablet which has its own little. I will actually draw and sketch and stuff. And the other thing I found is that there's like a. So I'm well. I think I'm considered a little bit old-fashioned in that I still use the old, like not just video calls, but I use my phone a lot, and I've always had to have like a lot of minutes. I have unlimited minutes now,
Yeah.
and I just pick up the phone. And this is going to shock some people. I ring people without scheduling it, right?
Yeah.
I
Oh,
think,
do you remember those days?
like in the old days,
Oh,
like, because I figure they'll either answer or they won't.
yes.
And I think sometimes if it's, I mean, I know there's a flip side to that, that it's potentially interrupting someone, but like,
Hey, have
well,
you got SMS? Text them and say,
yeah,
have you got 5 minutes?
exactly. So I think it's really about using the technology that we have. A rule of thumb that I can't remember, I wish I could remember who I heard this from, was that generally speaking, if it's a critical, like if it's a crucial conversation, use the highest fidelity of communication technology that's available to you. So the highest fidelity is face to face.
Yeah.
If you can't, like in person, if you can't be in person, then, and it's a crucial conversation, then maybe use video. If you can't use video, then use a phone call. And if you can't use a phone call, use email. But don't use email like like you wouldn't use email to have a disciplinary conversation. Do you know what I mean? So it's about matching the, and I joke about that, but I have heard examples of people getting really offended, not about disciplinary, but about people communicating stuff by email, where they're like, well, hang on, this should have been a conversation.
So 2 rules for email. 1, never give bad news in an email. And 2, never write a long email.
Oh, well, I'm very guilty of that one, Alan. But
anyone who sends me a long email, I've stopped reading after the first paragraph. I might scan it. I may go back and reread it if I really have to. But no, I'm absolutely with you. If you think about people walking over to your desk in an office and saying, "Can we talk about something?" That's really important. So somebody's sending you an email saying, "Hey," not very important. So I think we've already been through the, hey, working from home is great, and we all love working from home, and we're all amazed how much we can do. I think as people start to wander back into the office, we'll come to appreciate the office some more. And we're probably going to rebalance, but I think we'll find there's still a role for face-to-face communication.
Oh, without a doubt, and the sort of the physical, tangible playing about with ideas.
So remember, a lot of our teams at the moment, they are working on the social capital they've built over years. You're going to say, Adrian?
Yeah, so I'll just bring in a few comments now, and then we'll take one or two final questions. So Kavita just observed Kavita says, I like the concept of a minimum viable team. Sometimes agile teams have too many roles which overlap so much. You have a UX designer, a user researcher, a PO, and a BA. Quite a challenge. That is a whole webinar on its own, but I think it's suffice to say it's a very, very good point.
Just remember, you don't have to staff every role. Not every team needs every role.
Yes, yeah. Hertz just says, nice approach with the strategic versus tactical product owner. Vlad says, I love that yes sound from you, Adrian, when Alan mentioned what people say and what they do are very different things. That is the danger, by the way, of doing research with things like questionnaires and focus groups, is that there's the saying doing gap. But again, that's probably a whole other webinar. So Michelle asks, and this is again a question I think will be on a lot of our lips, is do you think the product owner role is a viable career choice for a business analyst? And what does the product owner career path look like?
The problem with the technology industry at the moment is that when we adopted Agile, we blew up our career model. Because if you think about it, when I came into the industry, it was quite common that people would start as a tester, and after a few years testing, they'd be allowed to become a programmer. And after you program for a few years, you might become a programmer analyst. And after you've done that for a few years, you might become a systems or business analyst. And then you might become a project manager, or you might become an architect. And our career path was like a salmon swimming up the waterfall. Your objective was to get as far up that waterfall as we could. Agile came along and blew up the waterfall. And it also, in the process, blew up our career model. And it's fine if you're a coder or a tester or probably even a BA who loves doing that and you're happy to stay there doing that. But for those of us who have a little bit of an ego, shall we say, a little bit would like pay increases which aren't more than inflation.
Yes, that would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I don't think it's really a case of should you have a career as a BA or a PO. I think the two career paths lie parallel.
And there's like an intersection, isn't there? Is the way it is interesting because another thing I see, and this is why one of the reasons the BA profession has always fascinated me is I see it as almost like a whole series of Venn diagrams. Because someone made the comment about, say, like user experience earlier. Well, actually, I think many BAs will know a little bit. They won't be user experience experts, but they'll have to know a little bit about user experience and customer experience, and actually strategy formation, and so that you get that. But it's certainly I guess a viable sidestep, which then leads to its own own.
If you think about my model before, that the product owner is a large circle, and one subset in there is BAs, and one subset is product management. At one stage, I toyed with, should we rename the product owner, business analyst product owner, and product manager business? And I concluded no, because in labeling the role, you are determining the skill set, whereas really you want, when those skills become apparent, that's the time to get the specialists. If you label the role too early, so I think you could pursue a career as a product owner who specializes in corporate internal projects. And there is where you'll find a lot of the BA skills useful. Now, there's other places where you'll find the BA skills useful, but you can keep using your BA skills in some PO environments. So you can be a PO, and it's just seeking out those PO assignments which are going to make the best use of your BA skills.
And it's interesting because I think a lot of BAs are probably doing, like a lot of POs are probably doing a lot of BA without realizing, and a lot of BAs are probably doing bits of PO without. It is that, and it comes back to, as you quite rightly said, Alan, that if you take the IIBA's definition of a business analyst, it's anyone who does business analysis, or maybe a product owner is anyone who does product ownership stuff. So it's
get away from the role label and think about the skill set.
Yeah.
Business analysis is a skill set.
Yes, definitely.
And many product owners would benefit from having more BA skills.
Absolutely. So just a last couple of comments, then we will unfortunately have to call it a day. But so Robbie says that online chat systems and chat rooms have been really useful with the remote working. So thanks, Robbie. That's a really useful thing to know. Claudia asks, can you give any examples of online whiteboard tools, especially if you know of a good free one? So I'll just mention 3 that I know of. I won't pass judgment over any of them. For something that is free but basic, providing your organization doesn't block it, there is Google Jamboard. There is a physical Google Jamboard piece of hardware, but there's also Google Jamboard. You can use stickies and stuff. There is, I find these next two really hard to pronounce, Mural and Miro.
Yes, they're the two I would think of as well, yeah.
And I'm sure there are many, many others as well on top of that. So, thank you, Alan, for everything you've said here. Really, really fascinating topic. We could carry on talking for hours, I'm sure, but here we must leave it. I am certain, Alan, that people will want to know more about what you do. Yep. They'll want to know more about the stuff you've written, and they'll want to connect with you. How can people connect with you? And apologies if we haven't been able to answer your question live, but Alan, if people are people able to send questions to you after this?
Yes, I'll type my email address into the chat window there. I'm simply Alan at alankelly.net. If you want me on Twitter, I'm alankelly.net, and I'll let you guess what my domain name is. You can find my website. I'm only too happy to have questions. I am in this online world. I am starting to run some online workshops. I've got one starting this week.
User story. You're doing user story training, Alan.
Well, that is the one that's coming to an end. Came to an end last week, and it was a great success. Although I thought if I ran it as small sessions over a few weeks, that might be used into people's schedules and improves learning. The feedback I'm getting is that while people like it that way, they'd rather have it all in one afternoon.
Oh, interesting.
So that's going to be my next experiment for later in the month on user stories. Tomorrow I'm kicking off one looking at value, and I've got some interesting exercises in there. So if you look at my website, I'm starting to put these things up. It's an evolving field. I need to switch the virtual background off here to show you.
It is a fantastic backdrop.
It is. Come to Adrian on the beach next year.
It reminds me when we could be close to other people.
This is my latest book, Art of Agile Product Ownership, A-Press. That's where you'll get a lot of my views on product ownership. Buy the book, connect with me. I'm on LinkedIn if you want to connect, or subscribe to my newsletter.
Fantastic. And I would encourage everyone listening, whether you're watching the recording or indeed live, to connect with Alan. I used to, I'm not sure I've ever told you this, Alan, but I used to, when speaking to others, I used to say, Alan Kelly's one of those really great, intelligent people who I agree with about 90% of what he says, but vehemently disagree with 10. What's really interesting is in about the last 10 years, I'd now say it's about 95-5. And I don't think your views have changed. I just think I now realise you were right, which is really irritating.
Oh, that is so good for my ego. But I do need some disagreement, you know, Adrian. I don't want to be one of these people who surrounds himself with yes men.
No, indeed. Well, Alan, thank you so much. As I say, we could continue talking for hours. So massive thank you for talking about such an interesting and important topic. And thank you to everyone who has tuned in live or indeed is watching the recording. As a reminder, these BA community webinars are really aiming for us to talk about topics that are perhaps on the periphery of business analysis, but that doesn't make them any less important, but it often does make them even more unusual and interesting. So later today or early tomorrow, you'll get an email with a survey. Would really appreciate if you could fill that in. One of the questions is, what topics would you like to see more of? Agile was one topic, so we've got a whole bunch of sessions on that, so do let me know. And when you click out of this webinar, you'll see a list of all the other upcoming webinars, so please do register for those as well. So again, thank you to everyone who's attended. Thank you very much, Alan. Hope to see you all again somewhere soon. So enjoy the rest of your day.
Goodbye, everyone.
Bye.